Hey guys, Marslingan here, bringing you another Dragon Ball Z Dokkan battle video, and today we are going to be having a very detailed deep dive look at INT Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta and INT Legendary Super Saiyan Broly. We are going to be comparing them across a number of different categories to determine once and for all who is the best TUR. So there's a bunch of different ways that we're going to rank them. You can see now up on the screen the list of categories that I have chosen. So we are going to go over their leader skill, the categories that they are in, their links, their active skill, what it does and how you get it, their attack stat on turn 1, their attack stat on turn 10, and then their defense on turn 1 and their defense on turn 10. Now, you might think, especially with the turn 10 stats, that these are kind of weighted a little bit unfairly towards Broly because he is a unit that infinitely stacks, whereas Gogeta is not. And whilst I can concede that that is true, I want to use this format in the future when comparing units. And obviously the fact that Broly stacks is definitely a positive for him in longer form events. So whilst in this particular example it might seem a little unfairly biased towards Broly to have that be one of the ways we are comparing them, but again, it will come into play for later videos that I decide to do like this as well. So for both units, we are going to be comparing them on a team that gives them a 170% boost to attack and also to defense. So for Gogeta, we are going to be showing him off on this Kamehameha team. And then for Broly, we are going to be showing him off under his own team build. So as you can see, this is not the general kind of team I would run. I'm not bringing any support units because I don't want the numbers to be thrown out by different levels of support being the unit in the third slot. So I've made it so that essentially no units that will be in the third slot on any rotation are going to affect the numbers for Broly and Gogeta. So, for their leader skill, Gogeta is the leader of the Giant Ape Power category, as well as having Shadow Dragon Saga as his sub-lead. So if we have a look at the Giant Ape Power category, obviously there are some fun units on here. We have the 4-year anniversary LRs, the Goku and Vegeta. Both of them have aged pretty well. We have the LR Team Bardock, who for some reason on both versions at this time still do not have all the copies available to actually rainbow them. They are pretty decent. On this team they can function as a support unit. Then of course we have the Gohan from Super Battle Road. After his EZA he is actually pretty good as long as you're running him on rotation with a Goku. And then the LR Baby is on here as well, who again is another very good unit who is, I think, a little bit underrated. He doesn't fit super well on this team though. But then if we scroll down to have a look at some of the TURs, obviously Super Saiyan 4s are a little bit more restricted outside of whether, you know, if you didn't summon on the Heroes banner. A lot of the best units on this team come from the Heroes banner, like Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta, Super Saiyan 4 Broly. Super Saiyan 4 Gohan is actually really good despite not being a TUR yet. Same for Super Saiyan 4 Bardock. Obviously on JP, the same name update exists, so you can run the Tech Gogeta as well. And then of course the AGL Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta and the STR Super Saiyan 4 Goku will be getting EZAs on the horizon. The category does of course include a bunch of great ape units, although unfortunately not many of them, or if any really, are considered top tier. This Super Saiyan 3 GT Goku is one of the few support units, but he does not hold up very well defensively. And then of course the AGL Wrathful Broly is also on the category, who's a very solid unit, but again he's kind of a little bit out of place in this category. And then obviously just down here we have the Gohan and the Bardock. Once they get awakenings they are going to be fantastic. So there's a couple of really good units on this category for sure, but as you can see it is quite restricted in terms of what is available to you. And then when we look at Shadow Dragon Saga, again this is another category that is super restricted. The LR Super Saiyan 4s are again on here, so obviously there is some crossover. So really his secondary leader skill I feel like you only use when it comes to, say, for example, Shadow Dragon Saga Super Battle Road, it's just much better to use Gogeta than it is to use the physical Omega or the stand-in, which is the Oceanus. So other than that, the rest of the category is not very strong. The new Nova, who released alongside Gogeta, isn't that great. The old Tech Easy A one is actually probably slightly better, especially when it comes to supporting the rest of the team. STR Omega's on the team, so obviously by using Gogeta as the leader, you can run him. And he's pretty good. Same with Oceanus, is very useful in Super Battle Road, for example. But Shadow Dragon Saga is not really a team that people run very often. And when you take out the units that are already on Great 8 power, there's not a huge amount of units that you're going to want to bring alongside Gogeta and the other Super Saiyan 4s on this particular team build. Now, when it comes to Broly, he introduced the Planetary Destruction category. So this one has some weird choices because it has like the LR Piccolo, and I believe he is actually the only Piccolo on the team other than the other versions of him, and also Jackie Chun, even though they only destroyed the moon, but they're still on Planetary Destruction. Beerus is on the category, but he doesn't really link up very well with anyone else who is on the category, apart from, I guess, Champa, who is a unit that you probably don't really want to use that much anyway. But the category does feature some strong units. Obviously Broly, the LR Brolys, the Prime Battle Frieza, who after his Easy A is insanely good. Turles and the AGL Turles are on here. And then of course the Boos are on here. Kid Boo and the Buff Boo specifically. Not the Super Boos or Bootankses. But that is the perfect combo because Kid Boo and Buff Boo are a really, really good rotation. And of course, physical Kid Boo is an incredibly strong support unit. So when you couple this with the fact that Broly's other leader skill is also for movie bosses overall is probably one of the stronger extreme type categories in the game. Obviously, there are a couple of super type units, basically just Beerus and then Tapion. But this team already was incredibly good. With units like the Turles and the Brolys already being on here, Bojack, Metal Cooler, Android 13, the new Janemba, who is kind of mid, but you know, the old Janembas, they're still good, and they're on here. All the Coolers, there's a couple of Freezers on here as well. So when you look at the crossover between movie bosses, which was already a good team, had a couple of solid supports like Metal Cooler and the AGL Turles. When you mix that together with Planetary Destruction, which is now giving you access to Kid Boo, who's an insanely good support unit, gives you access to the Cells, a couple of other Freezers who are not on movie bosses. Overall, the combination of those two categories is an incredibly strong combo and can make for some very, very good teams. So with that being said, I think it's pretty safe to say for this first category that the winner here is definitely Broly. So moving on to categories. So if we look at Gogeta first, Gogeta is in Fusion, Shadow Dragon Saga, Kamehameha, Final Trump Card, and Giant Ape Power. And then Broly is in Movie Bosses, Pure Saiyans, Full Power, Target Goku, Exploding Rage, Inhuman Deeds, and Planetary Destruction. So straight away off the bat you can see Broly is in more categories, but if we look at some of the categories that no one really runs or are very minimal, we can kind of eliminate for Broly Exploding Rage, Inhuman Deeds, possibly even Target Goku. A lot of people underrate Android 13 or only use him as an Androids category leader. So Full Power, Pure Saiyans, Movie Bosses, and Planetary Destruction are all very solid categories. So I would say 4 out of his categories are very, very good, like almost top tier teams in the game. And then when we look at Gogeta, like I say, when we talked about his leader skill, Shadow Dragon Saga is not really a great team. Fusion is a strong team, but is obviously very restrictive. It has some big ticket Dokkan Fest exclusives and then LRs, and then a lot of the other units in it are not particularly top tier. Kamehameha, though, is arguably one of the best categories in the game. Has a lot of very, very strong units on it. Final Trump Card, again, whilst having a slightly lower leader skill, features a lot of very top tier units. And then Giant 8 Power, as we discussed in the leader skill section, does have some very solid units on it, but without having like a proper sub leader, then if you don't have Gogeta, you can't really even run the team. So that one is, again, probably not as high a tier category as some of the others. So overall, whilst I think that both of them are on a pretty good combination of categories, I think in this case I would have to say that BROLY has the edge ever so slightly, because he's on a couple more top tier teams that you see run more often and are more available in the friends list. Okay, so next up on the list we have links. So if we look at Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, he has Super Saiyan, Kamehameha, Shocking Speed, Over in a Flash, GT, Fused Fighter, and Fierce Battle. And then BROLY has Saiyan Warrior Race, Super Saiyan, the Saiyan Lineage, Berserker, Prepared for Battle, Hardened Grudge, and Fierce Battle as well. So if we look at quote-unquote bad links, starting off with BROLY, Hardened Grudge is a really bad link. It's a 2-key link and 10% attack at level 10, but very few units in the game have this. All of the damage calculations and defense calculations I did for this video all involved using the unit alongside the one I would consider to be their best link partner, and that unit for BROLY doesn't even have Hardened Grudge. Very few units in the game have this link. And then of course he does also have Berserker, which is not a great link. Even at level 10 it still has a 50% or less HP restriction. It is a 30% attack link at level 10, and he does share it with his best link partner, but the chances of you getting it to be active are obviously hit or miss depending on the situation. And then Saiyan Lineage is a fairly decent key link. He does at least have Prepared for Battle, which is of course one of the most common Saiyan key links. And then Super Saiyan and Saiyan Warrior Race. And when we look at Gogeta, Gogeta is massively stacked with key links, which helps him fit onto a whole bunch of different teams. So he does have Shocking Speed, which is 2 key and 5% defense at level 10. Over in a Flash is 3 key and 7% attack. GT is 2 key and 10% attack and defense, and Fused Fighter is 2 key and 5% attack and defense. So his actual just single main focus attack links are Fierce Battle, Kamehameha, and then Super Saiyan. It's very easy to get all of those active on a lot of the teams that you run him on, and then because he has this wide spread of key links, he can be very versatile with who you put him next to in order to actually activate that extra bit of key to guarantee that he super attacks. And of course, by having that good mix of key links, he can work really well as a unit that you put in slot 2 and is able to activate key links of units in slot 1 and 3, even if they have very different links from each other. So he works very, very well as a bridge unit. So considering all of those things, I would say that in this particular instance, overall, I would give the win to Gogeta. He has a lot less links that are either, you know, not common or that you're just not going to see active very often. So I think he takes the edge here, even if it is only slightly. Next up, we have active skill. Now, I know this one is going to be a little bit contentious because both of these guys do actually have an active skill that can be very RNG based, and so everyone's experiences are going to be slightly different when it comes to how often you get to see these activate. So of course, for the sake of this comparison, I'm trying to go by not just averages but just sort of a general best and worst case scenario sort of thing. So if we start off with Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, his active skill is to give himself attack and defense 40% and give all enemies attack and defense minus 40% for 1 turn, and this can be activated after the character receives an attack 4 or more times. Now for Gogeta, this means he does actually have to be hit. So if you get super attacked and he counters the super, that does not count as him receiving an attack, or if he dodges, because he is an int unit. So whilst I would never recommend giving him extra dodge, he does come with a free level 5 dodge in the hidden potential system. So if he dodges or counters a super, that does not count towards his build up. And then when we look at BROLY, his active skill is to give himself 6 key, 60% attack, and make all attacks effective against all types for the 1 turn. And this can be activated after performing 4 or more super attacks. Now, both of them, you're kind of at the mercy of RNG. With Gogeta, you're at the mercy of where the attacks are going to be. So, for example, say you go into an event and the majority of the attacks are in slot 3, which can happen sometimes. It means that Gogeta is only really going to be getting put in front of 1 or 2 attacks, depending on how slot 1 and 2 are spread out. And then, of course, on the opposite end of that, it's very easy sometimes to go into a mode like, say, Super Battle Road and have 4 attacks or more in slot 1. Which means that as long as Gogeta doesn't dodge or counter a super attack, he's going to fulfill that active skill restriction on turn 1. Now, when it comes to Broly, he has to super attack 4 times. Now, he does have the potential, especially if you have dupes, or at least have given him some additional with a skill orb. If you're fighting a Hybrid Saiyan or a Pure Saiyan enemy, it is actually possible for him to super attack 4 times in one turn. But the RNG related there is what's going to mess you up in that scenario, because those of you who saw my summon video, obviously both of these units are 79% and full level 10 links at the consideration for this video. So I do have dupes in my Broly, I do have a decent amount of additional. I have had him attack 4 times in one turn, many times. Never have all 4 of them been super attacks. The best I've managed to see is 3 super attacks and 1 normal attack. Now again, this is purely RNG. You could take him into your first ever run with him with some additional either from a dupe or a skill orb and him super attack 4 times on turn 1 for you straight away, but it's not very likely to see that occur. And then for Gogeta, you're at the mercy of where the enemy attacks are placed, which again, both of these things you have no control over and are completely randomly generated. But when it comes to which one is more likely for you to see, a lot of it depends on the game mode that you're playing. So Super Battle Road is a good example of somewhere where you're potentially going to get Gogeta's active skill conditions fulfilled in the first turn, because it's possible to have so many attacks in slot 1. Whereas if you go into, say, the Legendary Goku event or Infinite Dragon Ball History, it's very possible that you only have 1 attack in slot 1 and 2. And of course, because Gogeta is so explosively powerful right out the gate, it's very possible for him to get hit once and then the enemy's just dead before he gets to get hit again. So it can take longer to build up based on the rotations that are put in front of you. And then Broly, you're just down to, can you get enough additional super attacks? So the problem is, if you don't get all 4 super attacks on turn 1 to be able to then use the active skill on turn 3, you then have to get the rest of the super attacks on turn 3 and can use his active skill on turn 5. So both of these units can have their active skill ready to go on the next turn that they're around, but you're more likely going to see it from turn, well, I say turn 3, turn 5 technically onwards. So both of them are quite restrictive. I think in this case it comes down to like which mode you're playing. Super Battle Road, it definitely makes it a lot easier for Gogeta's active skill to proc, whereas for Broly the event doesn't really matter, it's down to the RNG of how much he super attacks. But when we compare the effects of what they do directly, Broly, 6 key, not really that important. Attack 60% is obviously a huge buff. Attacks effective against all types is very useful in certain situations. Whereas Gogeta, he only gives himself a 40% buff to attack, but he also gets 40% to defense. And then in a mode where you can lower the enemy's attack, 40% attack lower on the enemy is massive. In Super Battle Road, that really nerfs the amount of damage that you can take. And then of course he nerfs their defense 40% as well. Not always something that's super noticeable, but cutting the enemy's defense almost in half is definitely going to allow you to do a lot more damage. So I think when it comes down to it, whilst I don't actually consider either of their active skill conditions to be that bad, I think in this instance the W goes to Gogeta. Okay, so now we are going to move on to their starting attack. And I should clarify here that we are going to be looking at the, when I say turn 1 attack, we mean the first rotation that they come into the fight. So for both of these units, it happened to be that was on turn 2. And so I'm going to have to keep that a consistent thing going forward now for all of these stats, because we're going to be looking at their initial attack stat on their first turn, which is why it says turn 1, but it is technically turn 2. And then we're going to be looking at, in the next one down, turn 10. That will be the actual literal turn 10. So it means they will have been on rotation 5 times. So here we are on Gogeta's first turn. It is the second rotation, as I mentioned, but it is the first time that he's come into battle. We're going to have him linked up with physical Vegito Blue. They share the most links together, so we have Super Saiyan, Kamehameha, Over in a Flash, Fused Fighter, and Fierce Battle active. We're on the Kamehameha team, so we're under a 170% lead. So let us go ahead and see what we can get for his attack stat here on turn 1. So there we go, 3.62 million is Gogeta's turn 1 attack stat. So here we are for Broly's first turn on the battle. Is obviously rotation 2 again, but we are going to see what his attack stat is going to be here for his first super attack. So we have him linked up with the Tech LR Broly. He's definitely his best link partner. We have Saiyan Warrior Race, Saiyan Lineage, Prepared for Battle, Fierce Battle, and Super Saiyan active. So as you can see, the friend doesn't have Berserker at level 10, but that link's not active anyway, and it would not be active even if it was level 10, because the HP restriction does not change. So let us go ahead and see what attack stat we can get for our boy on turn 1 here. Okay, so 2.48 is his attack stat on turn 1 with 1 super attack. So there we have it. We see both of them launching their first super attack on turn 1. Both of them do raise attack on super, so obviously if Gogeta does an additional super, his attack stat will be even higher than that first one. And Broly is of course designed to potentially fire off multiple super attacks, but even if he performs 2 or 3, he does not hit the same attack stat that Gogeta does for that very first one. So quite clearly in this category for turn 1 attack, the W goes to Gogeta. So now let us move on to looking at their attack stats on turn 10. So here we are on turn 10. As mentioned in the intro, this is 5 rotations now that Gogeta has been in battle. And turn 10 was something I kind of picked arbitrarily. It was just a nice round number. And obviously with some of these powerful teams, you can see here we're getting closer to the end of the Legendary Goku event. So I didn't want to go for a higher number than that in case we weren't actually able to get to that number before beating the event. But something important to remember for Gogeta is his passive that gives him the extra 40% attack and defense only lasts for 8 turns. So that has now expired, which means that his attack stat is potentially going to be lower. So unfortunate timing that we got the Dokkan attack here. So we're not going to see the number up in the top left. We have to look at it in the bottom left. So as we can see here, it is 3.1 million attack stat on turn 10. Okay, so turn 10, 5 turns in battle. We'll check out the first attack stat that Broly gets here from his first super attack. And we have 3.12 million. All the dodging going on, but 3.12 million. Okay, so for this one, this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, because the numbers that you saw on the screen, obviously Gogeta had a slightly higher attack stat on turn 10, but the thing to bear in mind is that that is the static attack stat for Gogeta. That will never change, because that is, you know, his passive has run out. That is the attack stat that he gets with his best link partner with no support unit on the rotation. But Broly, it kind of depends how the event has played out all the way through. So for Gogeta, I didn't need to do this, but for Broly, I actually recorded a couple of different runs. I think it was 3 or 4 in total, where I got to turn 10 to see his attack stat. And this was kind of like the middle of the road one. I had one where it was way higher than this, and then one where it was slightly lower. And of course, this is the kind of problem you can run into in some of these long form events, where if, for example, you know, Broly comes in on a rotation where the enemy is almost dead, he super attacks once, kills them, and then that's it. He only gets the 1 super attack. Whereas if he's coming onto the rotation in a phase where the enemy has a fresh health bar, and you get that good RNG, he can super attack 2 or 3 times. So it's kind of hit or miss with him, because he is a stacking unit. I put this one in because it was kind of the middle of the road value. And then the other thing to consider, whilst I did not use either of them in the video, both of the units had their active skills available at this point. And of course, BROLY gets a much bigger buff from his active skill than GOGETA does, as well of course as the fact that BROLY's attacks all become super effective against all types. And in the clip that we saw, you know, we didn't finish off Goku, so there was the potential for other super attacks. So whilst the particular clip that I put into this video does show him with a slightly lower attack stat, in a lot of circumstances, depending on the RNG that you get, BROLY will be hitting higher numbers. So for that reason, I am going to give the turn 10 attack to BROLY. Now let us go ahead and move on to the next category, which is looking at both units' defense on turn 1. For this one, I am showing their defense purely before supering, because this is to evaluate them on their position in slot 1 if they were to receive attacks in that very first slot before they super attack. So here on the first turn, again linked up with physical Vegito Blue, we can see that we have 140k defense. So of course, because Gogeta raises his defense by 50% on super attack, we can see that post super his defense is going to be 210. Obviously there's no way to get that up on the screen because he doesn't keep that defense raised into the next turn, unlike BROLY. So pre super 140k, post super 210. So next up we have BROLY. Again, it's turn 2, but his first turn in battle, linked up with the Tech LR BROLY, and his defense for turn 1 is 136,000. Because he raises defense for 20% each time he super attacks, after one super attack, his defense will go up to around 160k. Okay, so we saw the turn 1 defense numbers up on the screen. Very, very close, with Gogeta being only slightly higher. But however, one thing that we must factor in is BROLY does have 18% damage reduction built into his passive, regardless of which enemies that you're fighting. He does get extra damage reduction against Pure Saiyans and Hybrid Saiyans, but that is post super attack. So before supering, their defenses are very, very close, but BROLY does have the damage reduction. So before supering, BROLY's defense is actually slightly better overall. And then I did speak to Sora, shout out to him. He does a lot of calculations on the Reddit and stuff. When it comes to post super attack, even though Gogeta's defense raises by a lot more, and the final number is going to be much, much higher, so 210 versus 160, with that 18% damage reduction, it means that against big hitting attacks, like for example taking a super, that damage reduction will actually mean that BROLY takes less damage. And then of course, if you are fighting a Pure or Hybrid Saiyan, after the first super attack, you're then also getting another 18% damage reduction. So BROLY will actually take less damage even after both units super attack once, even though Gogeta has a slightly higher attack stat. Now, another thing that we have to consider into the mix is, of course, the fact that Gogeta can counter super attacks with a 50% chance. So I wanted to try and look at these units in both their best and worst case scenario, because it is hard to compare certain things like this defense because they do have those different abilities, damage reduction versus the potential to counter a super attack. So in the best case scenario, obviously Gogeta would counter a super and you don't take any damage. But in a worst case scenario, where Gogeta does not counter the super, BROLY takes a lot less damage than him overall. So all things considered, if we're going to look at them in potentially their worst RNG scenario, BROLY does edge out Gogeta, even though his defensive number is slightly lower. So the winner for turn 1 defense is BROLY. Okay, so finally we are going to look at both units' defense on turn 10. As I stated at the very beginning, considering the nature of these two units, this one is obviously a foregone conclusion, but this is going to be a category that I will use for future comparisons of units if we do a detailed breakdown like this. So let's just have a quick look at those defensive stats. So when it comes to Gogeta's turn 10 defense, again, something we have to remember, as I said in the attack portion, is that he has lost that extra part of his passive. So as we would expect, his defense on turn 10 is actually lower than any of the previous turns, now that that passive has expired. So his defense turn 10 is 124,000. So of course, post super attack after the 50% raise, we would be looking at 180,000. Okay, so on turn 10, if we take a look at BROLY's defense, he is currently sat at 300,000. So of course, as I said in the intro to this final segment, it was probably always going to go to BROLY because of the infinite stacking. And then of course, remember all the points that we talked about in the turn 1 defense still apply here as well. So even against a non-pure or hybrid Saiyan, BROLY is getting 18% damage reduction, and then against one of those enemies post super attack, he is obviously raising defense again and then having an extra 18% damage reduction. So it is very clear by a considerable margin that the winner for turn 10 defense is BROLY. Okay, so there you have it. We have run down all the categories and you can see the results on the screen. I do still concede that the turn 10 attack can kind of go either way depending on the run of RNG that you have, but this was just my final opinion based on the testing that I did. So now we come to the conclusion part, and this is where things get a little bit tricky, because I did say in the intro that we would come to a definitive conclusion of who was better, but after doing all of this testing and speaking to Sora about the damage reduction and the super counter, we had a little bit of a detailed conversation about these two units, and I think it's very, very difficult to directly compare them because there are so many variables involved, like the super counter. Like if you get godly RNG, BROLY could multiple super attack every turn, which means his stats are going to skyrocket very quickly, but on the flip side of that, Gogeta could get supered every single rotation that he's on and counter every single time, which means he's not going to take any damage from the super attack, and he's going to dish out a bunch of extra damage as well. Plus, of course, there is the fact that Gogeta himself, if you have dupes, because we are evaluating both these units at 79%, you can additional super with him as well, which means he raises his defense even more. So there are times where his defense can hit some very high numbers. It's just, of course, the fact that BROLY being an infinite stacking unit, he very quickly is going to break free of the range that Gogeta can hit when it comes to defense by supering as many times as he does. So I do think it's quite difficult to compare them because, again, many modes in the game, especially the modes that are considered the end game content, can be very different in nature. BROLY is clearly designed for longer events. By the time you get to the end of a run on Legendary Goku event or Infinite Dragon Ball History, he is completely untouchable even if he gets super attacked because his defense is so high, whereas Gogeta can't compete defensively but can still counter super attacks. Unless you're against a unit who can disable dodge. So there's a lot of ways you can compare them. Super Battle Road, as another example, is a shorter event where BROLY is not going to get anywhere near as much time to build up his stats, and Gogeta, as we've seen from the turn 1 stats that he can hit, explodes out of the gate with insanely high attack stats and a very solid defense right from the first turn. So in Super Battle Road, depending on the stage and the team, I think it's fair to argue that Gogeta is often better. And then in longer form events, especially when you're going to be fighting a lot of pure or hybrid Saiyans to get that extra damage reduction and the other bonuses that BROLY gets, it's quite easy to argue that BROLY is the best. So this is the big factor when it comes to evaluating these two units. I think a lot of it is going to come down to personal preference and the kind of events that you like to run more so than others. So let me know down below in the comments, what do you think of these two units? Which one do you think is the best? Let me know where you like to use these units the most. I know a lot of people like to just play SBR stages for fun. A lot of people like to build different teams and run through those longer events to see the kind of crazy numbers they can get their units to hit. And obviously for those two types of people, you're probably going to prefer one unit over the other just based on how you like to play the game. But Hopefully you guys found this information useful. This took me a long time to put this together. The number of times I had to go in and out of the Legendary Goku event to get the rotations that I needed, and then get to turn 10 and record the details, and then I did each one like a couple of times to try and get a decent average, and then just include one of those runs in the footage. So this took me a long time to make, and hopefully you guys enjoy. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments section. So that is going to be it for the video, guys. This has been the Master Ningen. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new, check out the links down below for the Discord and the merch store, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one.